everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to review 5 books that I read in the beginning of the month of June. So you may have noticed that I have been very erratic in my video making this month, which there's just a lot going on. So, and I'm just not even gonna try to go into it, and I'm not gonna talk about my hair, which is an absolute disaster. We're just gonna go with it. All right, so the first book I completed in the month of June was a book for Read German Books. This is a reading theme for the entire year that has been hosted by Mel from Mel's Booklet Adventures and Britta Bowler to encourage us all to read more books written in German, and then for me, who doesn't read German, translated into English. So for this month, I picked The Inner Life of Animals by Peter Wollheben, I think is how you say it. I'm going to put a picture up here so you can see it. I am trash at pronunciation, and even after Britta coached me, I'm still awful at it. So this is a nonfiction book. It was written in German, and I will also write up here the translator's name because I don't have it with me. I listened to it on audiobook. It's about 7.5 hours long, and it's all about just what it says on the tin, how animals have much more intelligence and basically much more soul, quote unquote, than we've been willing to give them credit for having. And Peter is a forester in Germany, and he's basing this whole book on his experiences as a forester over the course of his lifetime. He does reference scientific studies, but this is mostly his opinion about things. And because of that, the book, in my opinion, suffers. I prefer my nonfiction to be based, if it's not a memoir, I prefer for it to be based in fact and science. And this book I really felt was his observations, which are great, but then he sort of ruminates based on his own philosophy of life about what animals' inner lives are like. So, for example, he spends a lot of time talking about hunting and how terrible hunting is and how we shouldn't hunt things or kill things because each living creature has its own life to live, and we're depriving that creature of their own life, which, I don't necessarily disagree with, but again, this is more of an editorial and less of a nonfiction science book. And I feel that the way that this book is marketed is as a nonfiction science book. So if you go into it with the correct attitude, I think you would enjoy this book. I found it in the beginning to be very charming. It's a great audiobook. It was charming. It's filled with lots of anecdotes about animals that he's encountered throughout his life and the hijinks those animals get up to. And all of that was great. It was only when he sort of went beyond that and sort of editorialized about his own philosophy on the consciousness of animals that I had a problem. So that was just an average read for me. I then finished another book in translation. This is Disoriental by Negar Djavadi. There is no R in that word. And I probably totally butchered that as well. And this is translated from the French by Tina Kover. This was an excellent book. I picked this one up at the end of May to read for hashtag Indie Press Project that Doris and other booktubers are participating in, because last month in May was Europa. I actually did finish this book on the last day of May, but I just haven't had a chance to talk about it yet. And I did want to bring it up because I really, really enjoyed this book. This is a book that's a sort of multi-generational novel written from the perspective of a young woman named Kimia. Kimia flees with her mother and her sisters from Iran when she's like 11 years old, somewhere in there, 10, 11, 12 years old. They flee from Iran, and they go through, a harrowing on-foot experience where they leave Iran and cross into Turkey, I believe, and eventually make their way to Paris, where her father is already living. Her father is a revolutionary, and he has been writing screeds and polemics about the administration in Iran, and of course that is not done. This all takes place, the historical part of the play takes place during the Iranian Revolution. So that's when they flee to France. And now Kimia is telling the story as she sits in a fertility clinic and waits for the results to know if she has been artificially inseminated. And this is a wonderful story. She's telling the story through her thoughts and her reflections as she sits in this doctor's office. So you're learning about her life and her childhood, but she's also reflecting back on her grandfather, who had a harem. This is long, long ago. Her grandfather who had a harem, or maybe it was even her great-grandfather, and her father and her mother's relationship, and how their relationship, they were so in love with each other and so invested in the political action work that they were doing that she felt left out as a child. And it's all about, as well, Kimia's sexuality and what she has to go through because of her sexuality. I just love this story. I thought it was really, really well told, and I was just interested and invested in it throughout, and it was just a marvelous experience. So I would highly recommend, if you're looking to read some more books in translation, if you're interested in learning more about Iran and its history, or the issues that somebody who's maybe not traditional, or not traditional, that's not the right word, who's not, who doesn't fit into the popular sentiments in terms of her sexuality, what they have to go through, this book is really, really excellent, and I would highly recommend it. The next book I finished was a chunker of a nonfiction. This is The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson. I buddy read this with Doris and Patrice and Karen, and it was a fabulous experience. So this is all about Winston Churchill and his first year as Prime Minister during the Blitz in World War II. It is comprehensive. So it's all about Churchill. We learn all about him and all of his quirks and all of the many people that are sort of in his inner circle. His wife, his children, his advisors in the British government during this time. We're learning about the American response to World War II at this time, and there's also chapters from the perspective of several high-ranking German officers. So you're getting all of these perspectives, and there's sort of short chapters, so it keeps the flow going, keeps the story being told. And Larson is just at the height of his power here. He's a master storyteller. This is fantastic narrative nonfiction. It reads, in a lot of ways, it reads like a novel because there's so much action happening here. And it's, I didn't know very much about like the particulars of the Blitz, and this really delves into a lot of that. And the people are such interesting characters. I mean, Winston Churchill himself, pink silk underwear wearing guy who would have meetings while he was in the bathtub regularly. And read it all for the story at the end about the first time Winston Churchill and FDR, Roosevelt, meet in Washington at the White House. Hysterical. Honestly, the whole book is worth it just for that one scene. I love this so much. This is a 5-star read for me. I would highly encourage any of you who like narrative nonfiction or historic nonfiction to pick this one up. This is a great story, very well told. Erik Larson hits it out of the park on this one. I then finished My Year of Meats by Ruth Ozeki. I did this as a buddy read with Joe Smith, and we had a fantastic time with this book. This is a really, really great book as well. So in this book, our main character is Jane, and she is a producer of a reality TV show. So this book takes place in the early 90s, and it was published in like 1998. So take yourself back, that long ago, way back in the Wayback Machine, to when reality TV shows were just getting started. She gets hired to film this reality TV show to promote meat in Japan. So she is supposed to find all American housewives and film them making their signature meat dish, mostly red meat, because that's what this company wants to sell in Japan. They want to encourage the Japanese to eat red meat. And Jane is a bit of a nonconformist, and she just can't seem to follow directions. So instead of just bringing like white heterosexual cisgender people to the screen for this Japanese programming, she starts to film people that fit into different categories, like a family of Mexican Americans who have a ranch in Texas, and a family that live in Louisiana that have adopted 11 children of different ethnicities. And a same-sex couple living in, I think, Massachusetts. So you can imagine how well those go over with her Japanese bosses. And so we're getting that side of the story, which is fabulous. And then we're getting the story of, Akiko is her name. Akiko is the wife of the Japanese man who is in charge of Jane for producing all these documentaries. Reality TV shows, basically, is what they are. And Akiko is having her own trouble with her marriage and with fertility. And her husband insists that she watch each of these documentaries and then cook the recipe that is showed in the TV show, and that's going to bring her to health. It's going to make her more American and healthy, and then she's going to be able to get pregnant and they'll be able to have a child. As the story goes on, we learn just how reprehensible her husband is. And Akiko is an extremely interesting character. She seems very subservient in the beginning. She is very subservient in the beginning and very traditional, or assumed to be traditional Japanese wife. Very accommodating to her husband, really doesn't like confrontations and all that sort of thing. Some very interesting perspective on Japanese culture from her perspective. And so Jane and Akiko's storylines overlap as the story goes on, as the book goes on. I love this. This book has everything in it that I love. It's snarky. It's about a reality TV show, which is hysterical. It has great characters that you root for, has interesting stories about what it truly means to be all American. It's saying a ton about the meat industry and the problems with that, and the environmental problems, the health problems. You may not want to eat meat ever again after you read this book. I just thought this was fascinating. Some people, I'm just going to throw this out here because I know this might bother some people. She kind of throws in little mini essays, nonfiction essays in the middle of some of this stuff to like explain some of the environmental or health issues relating to meat production, industrial meat production. I found that to be really great and interesting, but other people don't like that sort of thing dumped into their fictional story. Like, for example, it reminded me of Tommy Orange's There. And, there's that essay at the beginning of the book, that nonfiction essay about the history of Native Americans in North America. And I thought that was awesome. I really liked it, but I know some people thought that was misplaced and they just wanted their fiction. They didn't want nonfiction mixed in there, but I did not mind it. I really enjoyed it. This was another book that hit it out of the park for me. I've loved now both books by Ruth Ozeki. So Joe and I are going to read her. She has another novel, and we're going to try reading that, and as soon as we can both get a copy of it. So that's great. And then the last book I want to talk about in this video is a nonfiction that I buddy read with Britta Bowler at the beginning of the month. This is Darwin's Ghost, The Secret History of Evolution by Rebecca Stott. This is a great nonfiction book all about different individuals who laid the groundwork for Darwin to be able to fully pull together his theory of evolution and natural selection. So starting with the ancient Greeks, and then moving our way all the way up through, gentlemen who were studying natural history through like the 16, 17, 1800s, because we really do take quite a leap from the time of Aristotle, and then it's almost 2,000 years before we get any more writing. Not to say that there wasn't work being done, but for whatever reason, it hasn't stood the test of time. And so we have to go by what we have documentation of. But Stott does an excellent job of sort of fleshing out these individuals, describing what the political situation was like, where they lived. And I should say, even though I just said that it was like 2,000 years between Aristotle and then the next people, that's not exactly true, because we do have chapters in here from, I'm trying to find the table of contents. So, yeah, we have Aristotle, and then we have some information about Jahiz, who was a scientist working in Basra and Baghdad in 850, and then we jump into the 1400s. So we do have, you know, some early history there as well. And for those of you like me who grew up with a Western education, even though I have a degree in the sciences, the information about what was being developed in terms of evolutionary theory in places in the 800s, that never made it onto my curriculum. So there's a lot of information in here that I just simply had never heard of before, even though I studied evolution in college. But everything is so focused on Darwin that a lot of these earlier folks that really laid the groundwork have been forgotten over time, or just not bothered to be talked about. So I really like that aspect of it. Stott can tell a really great story as well. She does a nice job of you know, telling what each of the individuals discovered, but also telling what the political climate was like around them, you know, because for most of the time period that we're talking about here, the scientists had to be concerned that they were going to be killed for their beliefs, because the church really, after Aristotle, I mean, once we get into Christianity being sort of, at least in Europe, being the overriding political umbrella basically during that time period, you had to worry about, you know, were you going to get thrown in jail, burn at the stake, lose all your material wealth in terms of your housing and your money, were your wife and your children going to be left destitute because you've gone against religious theory by promoting, you know, the idea that species have changed over time, that, you know, God didn't make everything perfect on day one of the world, and now we're just all living with everything that was created that long ago. I mean, even to the point of, you know, not believing that the earth was the age that the Bible said it was. So very interesting in terms of giving you context around what these individuals had to deal with. And the only thing I will say is it's very apparent from this history that, you know, you had to have wealth in order to be able to do this kind of stuff, because you had to either have a wealthy benefactor or you yourself had to be wealthy in order to pursue scientific studies, because it wasn't a thing back then. You couldn't go to school to be a scientist back when these folks were doing their work. So it really was an area that only quote unquote gentlemen could be involved in. And that's kind of too bad. Goodness knows what we've missed out on over time, because we've, you know, the culture didn't allow for women or minorities to participate in discovery and exploration. So that's kind of a bummer. But other than that, I really, really enjoyed this book, and I would highly recommend it if you're interested in how we got to where we are today with our knowledge of evolution and natural selection. So those are 5 of the books that I read at the beginning of the month of June, and I hope that you have all found some good books to read lately, and I will talk to you later.